Good day, this is Greg Krasovsky. I'm an attorney, and today I wanted to talk to you about the legal services that my law offices offer to victims of excessive use of force and police brutality. Also, I offer legal services to those law enforcement personnel who've been unjustly accused of police brutality and excessive use of force. As a former police officer, as a former first responder who's also worked as an emergency medical technician, as a fire rescue technician, I understand the nuances of providing services in extreme emergency situations. Decisions have to be made quickly, on the spot. There's no time to second guess, and often lives are on the line. With all that said and done, we hold our first responders to certain standards of behavior. And these aren't unreasonable standards. They're absolutely reasonable standards. First responders, all of them have to understand that they're there to serve, protect with honor and integrity within laws, right, that are currently on the books and are being enforced. Service does not mean violating the rights of the population, regardless of what they're accused of what they've done. Protection of the population means the same thing. To protect the populace does not give you carte blanche authority to violate anyone's civil or legal rights. When you serve people with honor, that means you have to serve people with respect. You have to be honorable in your actions, and you also have to be respectful of others. This means that you should respect people you come into contact with just like you would respect members of your own family, your parents, your children, your brothers, your sisters, aunts, uncles, etc. You should treat them just like you would treat your neighbors if you have normal relations with your neighbors, I hope. And when we serve someone with integrity, that means we serve them with honesty, right? And with a full commitment to compliance with laws that are on the books. You may not agree with some laws, but they're in the books for a reason, right? They're enforced for a reason. You have to defer to the will and to the judgment of the legislators who put those laws on the books. You may not agree with them, but you're not in the position to oppose them, especially if violating those laws can lead to excessive use of force and police brutality. Well, that's the end of the political science lecture, right? And the moral philosophy lecture. Let's look at excessive use of force. People have to understand something, that sometimes people don't want to do what you tell them to do. Even firefighters have to use force if someone is not complying with them. If a firefighter tells someone, no, you cannot go into that building, or you cannot enter this particular area because it's a safety hazard, or you have to leave the premises with me, and the person starts to refuses to comply, and starts to create a potentially dangerous situation for himself or for others, sometimes you have to use physical force to remove the person, as crazy as it sounds. I've dealt with this as a fire rescue tech. The same issue comes up with even EMS personnel. And those EMS personnel will know what I'm talking about. Often when you have to render first aid, treatment, and transportation to people who are under the influence of narcotics or alcohol, these individuals can become combative and can start fighting with you. Or people who are mentally ill or who are having psychotic episodes. Often you have to physically restrain them and apply physical force. As embarrassing as it seems, I've witnessed cases where EMS personnel have had to knock people out in order to eliminate the threat that those individuals posed to first responders, especially women first responders who were not as strong as men and we're not capable of, sustaining attacks or punches from the patient that they're supposed to treat and transport. Now, for police officers, this is even simpler than that. Within the law enforcement police function, we as law enforcement officers often give people commands that they want to comply with. Commands that are given to suspects, commands that are already given to criminals who've committed crimes, often in front of the police officer or another law enforcement person himself. So what this means is that you may need to use physical force to make the individual comply. This has to be done within reason and to the barest minimum that's necessary. Excessive use of force appears where the law enforcement individual starts to use force that was not required. If you tell an old lady, listen, you have to, move. You can't be in this area, and because she's old, she doesn't comply with you right away, and you start using your baton on that person, that's excessive use of force. But this is a ridiculous, exaggerated example. But often now with new technology, we're dealing with cases where you have unwarranted use of mace, CNS pepper spray. We have unwarranted excessive use of tasers. And, taser may be technologically advanced and not as brutal as a, police baton, but the damage can be much more. It can cause epileptic seizures. It can cause the suspect's heart to stop or go into fibrillation. It can cause other problems, especially if there's excessive application of and continuous prolonged application of the voltage. People have become incontinent. They're unable to hold their urine. Their bladder is no longer able to hold urine, or people have become incontinent. They're no longer able to hold their feces with their colon and things like that. So these are horrible consequences, or other permanent nerve damage. That was just unwarranted. So if you are someone you suspect that you're the victim of excessive use of force, right, by first responders, whether it's law enforcement personnel, fire rescue personnel, EMS personnel, feel free to reach out to my law offices. Let's look at it. We handle these cases nationwide with local counsel. My job is to initially evaluate your case using the expertise that I have from having done these jobs, not just as a lawyer, but someone who has done fire, EMS, and police work. And that's what I bring to the table. But just so you don't have a misunderstanding of loyalties, my loyalty first and foremost is to people's legal rights. Doesn't matter what you may have done. You still have an expectation, and you still have the right to be treated within the law, right? When people take the law into their own hands and start getting vindictive or vengeful or taking aggression out on you, that's bad news. It's triple bad news when people are doing this under the protection and the color of authority as first responders. So in that case, I'm on your side. If you're a first responder who did everything right, who did everything reasonable, given the circumstances that you found yourself in, given the situation that you were in, and people start unfairly, improperly, perhaps for political purposes, accusing you of excessive use of force or police brutality, reach out to my law offices, and I will be your ardent, most loyal supporter and protector within, my abilities. Because just like anyone else, just like a regular civilian, you also have legal rights, especially if you believe you've done nothing wrong. And there are things that corroborate your opinion that you've done nothing wrong. standards for use of force, testimony of your colleagues, of witnesses, video footage, whatever. What's important in these cases is to reach out and to talk to a lawyer as quickly as possible. While memories are still fresh, not just your memory and the memory of the people involved in the incident, but also witnesses. And witnesses haven't moved and can be located. And also, you have to reach out quickly to make sure that any video footage, perhaps local businesses, CC cameras, or outdoor cameras, because remember, that footage periodically gets erased. So you want to make sure that you call a lawyer and we have the opportunity to try to get all the evidence that we need before it disappears or just becomes irretrievable. That's important as well. Another issue. Remember, in cases of excessive use of force and police brutality, if you're a victim, our goal is to protect your rights and to seek fair compensation for you. Fair compensation, this doesn't mean you hit the lottery. That's not what fair compensation means. Fair compensation means just compensation for the injuries that you've suffered, for the pain and suffering, including emotional damage. Compensation for medical care that you'll need, including psychological, psychiatric care. Compensation from time that you've lost from work or from school or other issues. That's what's reasonable. In some states, in some cases, punitive damages are also applicable. And the whole purpose of punitive damages in those jurisdictions and in those cases when they're available is to literally punish the perpetrator, not just individually, but also set an example to other perpetrators that they don't do this again. So we're not opposed, and we will support seeking punitive damage whenever it's necessary. If, due to excessive use of force or police brutality, you have been falsely accused, for instance, resisting arrest, assault on police, and because of that you have to suffer through incarceration, pretrial detention, or even, let's say, a false conviction or imprisonment, then obviously our goal is to get justice for you, to try to make sure that these charges are thrown out if trial hasn't taken place and you haven't been convicted of them, and you obtain compensation for any inappropriate, improper incarceration because you were deprived of your freedom. If you were already convicted of assault on police, assault on a first responder, or resisting arrest, or failing to obey lawful orders, or let's say providing false statements to the police, then our goal will be, if it is possible, to get those convictions overturned and to also seek compensation for you for incarceration, for any damage that you suffered to your reputation, to your livelihood, to your mental health from having gone through that, including being convicted. And also, the damage that you suffered to your reputation in the court of public opinion. Regarding first responders, fire, rescue, EMS personnel, law enforcement personnel, just like I do as a former cop, of the consequences of even having an allegation made against you for improper or excessive use of force, or violation of someone's civil rights, or police brutality. That can have tremendous damage. That can, it will do tremendous damage to your career potentially. You may be put on administrative leave. Your colleagues may look at you the wrong way. You may be denied promotions. You may be suspended without pay. You may incur legal costs that are not borne by your union. right, or by your agency. So obviously our goal in those cases is to protect your rights, to make sure that any false, improper, exaggerated charges are dismissed after being properly investigated. If necessary, we will bring in experts that will show that what you did not violate someone's rights, does not constitute improper excessive use of force, does not constitute police brutality or violation of someone's civil rights. If necessary, we will bring in private investigators who will help locate witnesses, who will help expose any fraud that's being committed to further these false or exaggerated charges against you. That's important as well, right? Because our goal here is to seek justice for both the alleged victim and the alleged perpetrator. Justice is very straightforward, right? It's giving people what they're due, right? What they deserve under the law, right? Once the truth has been ascertained, right? Legal facts, truth have been ascertained in the proper setting in a court of law, right? By the truth finders, whether it's a judge, a jury, and things like that. But before you get to the judge and the jury, it's important that we bring this to the attention of the prosecutors. We bring this to the attention of the disciplinary unit, whether it's internal affairs or other unit of your agency, whether it's fire rescue, EMS, or law enforcement, to explain what happened. If you're not able to explain the way a lawyer would, with the additional resources that we can bring in, like I've said, experts, private investigators, and things like that. Citing legal precedent, citing professional standards, citing other cases. That's what it involves. So, to wrap things up, if you've been involved in a case that involves charge of improper excessive use of force, police brutality, or let's say violation of someone's civil rights, whether you're law enforcement personnel, whether you're EMS personnel, whether you're fire rescue personnel or another first responder, for instance, Coast Guard people, right, things like that. But those do fall under law enforcement. Then reach out to our law offices as quickly as possible. If you are a victim of this, if someone has violated your civil rights, if someone has improperly or used force against you, or used it excessively, or has brutalized you, or has made false charges against you to cover up, to justify the excessive use of force, the police brutality, and the violation of your civil rights, then reach out to my law offices and we'll help protect you and we'll help get you justice. Remember, folks, as hard as it may seem to believe, we're all on the same side, right? I think all reasonable people want to live in a peaceful, law-abiding society. In a society where you can expect to receive honest service and protection from first responders, where you can expect those first responders to protect you, not just from natural events, but also from man-made events, auto accidents, crimes. And as a first responder and as a fellow citizen, you expect to be allowed to do your job properly without facing false or exaggerated charges when what you believe you did was no wrong, given the circumstances, given the situation. So, on that note, the most important thing is when these things happen, we have to deal with them in a civil and a peaceful manner. Our system does work. And if you don't think it works, then start reaching out peacefully to the people who are supposed to make it work, to law enforcement, federal and local, to prosecutors, to politicians, right? Legislative, executive branches, to human rights organizations, if necessary to local businesses. But the goal is to make sure that these cases are handled properly and justice prevails. What none of us want to see is, as the result of an allegation or a situation where improper, excessive use of force may have taken place, or police brutality, where people start taking the law into their own hands. People start to, instead of having peaceful protests and taking peaceful actions, start committing acts of vandalism, start to riot, start to loot, destroy property, and even resort to arson. That doesn't help anyone. It hurts communities. It hurts local businesses. It presents a threat to all individuals involved. And rarely is it aimed, or rarely does it get to the individual people who were involved in that situation. In other words, if someone has wronged you, don't take it out on other people, regarding whether you're a first responder or a civilian who thinks they've been wronged by first responders. Let's try to handle these things peacefully, because we cannot afford to see the long-term damage, material damage, financial damage, and also the moral damage in terms of distrust, animosity, lingering thoughts of getting revenge. You don't want to see that. Or loss of respect or loss of trust. That simply erodes at our society. We're not living in the easiest times. We're living in a global economy where competing countries don't really care about all this stuff. But if we continue to destroy our neighborhoods, if we continue to destroy our cities, if we continue to destroy the trust and the obligation that exists between the population and its first responders, then those other countries are just simply going to beat us out in global competition with all the predictable results. And the predictable results are very simple. People lose jobs, people lose income, governments lose tax revenues, they can't afford the level of services that they used to provide, they can't afford to fix up the infrastructure that they need to. No one really wins, right? Does the looter really win? Okay, so you get some free stuff that he stole. At the end of the day, that's not a victory, because you've just morally degraded yourself as a thief or as a burglar, as a vandal, if not as a robber. You haven't helped your community, and you haven't helped bring people to justice. You may have helped other people realize some political goals and ambitions, but do you want to be that? Do you want to be a pawn in someone's political game? I don't think any of us, as citizens, as voters, as taxpayers, as members of a community or a family, want to be pawns in political schemes. I hope that's just not the American way. So thank you for taking the time to listen to this video, and feel free to reach out to my law offices. If you know someone who thinks could benefit from getting expert or legal advice from my law office on these issues, then please refer them to us. Thank you. And let's just keep the peace.